Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. This show is brought to you by Swarbricks, the first law firm in New Zealand to accept Bitcoin for legal services. The team at Swarbricks are Bitcoiners, and they are knowledgeable about the legal aspects of Bitcoin in New Zealand in areas like estate planning, property and trusts, as well as general legal advice. Swarbricks offers a 20% discount for services paid in Bitcoin. Find out more at swarbricks.co.nz/Bitcoin. Now, in today's episode, I talk with Andrew Cummins. Andrew formerly worked for Bitcoin Magazine as the Growth Marketing and Analytics Manager, and he shares the journey that took him from New Zealand to Colorado Springs, including his Bitcoin story, being on the ground at the Bitcoin Miami conference, and his future plans. I do hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, please send an email to hello@thetransformationofvalue.com and I will get back to you. Otherwise, on to the show. How are you going, Andrew?
Yeah, doing good. Sitting here in Colorado, and thunderstorms going on, and I just had a jet fly over my head, which is pretty cool. I'm right by the Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, so yeah.
How long have you been over there for?
Been in Colorado since about 2020, kind of like the start of COVID. But originally, it'd been in the US overall since about mid-2018.
Yeah. What drew you to the US originally?
My wife, funnily enough. So at the time I was living in Melbourne. That's where I met her. She was down there doing a master's degree. So we lived there for about 3 years, and then luckily the company I was with at the time sponsored me to come over to the US. So started in Chicago and then moved our way over to Colorado at the start of COVID.
The great migration westward. That's cool.
That's the one.
Yeah. Just coming back to Melbourne though, were you involved in Bitcoin stuff at all when you were over in Australia?
Not really. I had a bunch of Kiwi friends over there who were kind of into it at the time, and I think I even remember watching a documentary about it, but I hadn't really got into it until about 2020, and I can kind of go into that story if you want me to go into kind of my background of how I got into it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, how did you get into Bitcoin?
So it was around about July 2020, I think Peter Schiff, everybody's favorite Bitcoin advocate, went on the Joe Rogan podcast. So I gave that a listen, and then I think I subscribed to Schiff's podcast, and then it was kind of a snowball effect where Anthony Pompliano went on Peter Schiff's podcast. So I subscribed to Pomp, and then I think Peter McCormick went on Pomp's podcast. And I think McCormick's podcast was like what really got me hooked. But it was kind of a series of just going along different podcasts, starting with, ironically, with Peter Schiff on Joe Rogan. Yeah,
the podcasts are really emerging as a very powerful way of engaging with media, with new ideas. I think we are witnessing, and in fact, it's almost complete, the death of mainstream media. And so the ability to go into long form content. And I agree, Peter McCormick and some of the other Bitcoin podcasts, you can listen to them really go into every nuance over several hours in a way you can't get with a soundbite or a TikTok.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, even outside of the Bitcoin space, I mean, recently I listened to some of the podcasts that RFK's been on. And I mean, the Joe Rogan one, I think that was kind of like 3 hours long, and you really got to kind of hear his opinions and thoughts. He didn't touch on Bitcoin at all. He was on a Twitter Spaces yesterday talking about it, but yeah, to your point, I mean, you get so much more nuance and detail that you don't get in a soundbite. So yeah, I think obviously this medium is hugely valuable to just educating and really getting the message out there.
So you went down the rabbit hole listening to podcasts, and then what happened?
So got into it around about, I think I started really actually allocating in late 2020, and the price at the time was around about 10 or 11K. Kind of rode the wave all the way up to 69K and then all the way back down again. But I managed to thankfully get a job in Bitcoin around about the start of 2021 actually. I'd kind of, obviously since getting into Bitcoin, just spent a lot of time learning about it, reading books, listening to podcasts, and then I think I did. Pomp had it was a Crypto Academy course but the Bitcoin content in there is amazing. There's a guy called Cody Lowe who at the time was teaching the all the kind of Bitcoin related content, and I think he's now at Fitty. He's a
Mm.
really awesome teacher and just great stuff that he's producing over there. Um, but yeah, so kind of started in the Bitcoin space, working with Bitcoin Magazine around about uh, July of 2021.
What were you doing with Bitcoin Magazine?
Sorry, it was January actually of 2021. So kind of a whole host of things. I mean, we were a relatively small team at the time, and kind of still is, but kind of marketing side of things. So a lot of the paid ads that you see on like Facebook or Google for the conference, I kind of oversaw that, and then also some of the analytics. So kind of building out dashboards and Tableau, that kind of thing. So yeah, kind of a mix. Just being a small team, we kind of required to wear a lot of different hats.
Where is there like a central base for Bitcoin Magazine, or is it fully decentralized in terms of geographic location?
Yeah, there is. So the headquarters is in Nashville. So there's an office there, but it is actually quite, I guess, decentralized. There's kind of people all over the US. We had people in the UK as well. Actually, I think an office in Ukraine. And then our CEO and a couple of the senior leadership is actually in Puerto Rico, funnily enough. So yeah, there is a headquarters, but it's relatively distributed.
And I know you've recently finished up with Bitcoin Magazine, but I am just
Hmm.
curious to learn a little bit more about sort of the work you were doing there, because it really is. I've got a couple of the magazines, behind me, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think they are very well produced, and
Hmm.
they provide certainly a lot of nuance and I think very good storytelling around not just the Bitcoin tech, but some of the broader considerations. The latest,
Yeah.
the Julian Assange edition,
Hmm.
and that it's really looking at broader trends. Was it always like that, or was it more tech focused originally? Or
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't as much involved in the actual like production of the magazine or the content that went into it, but I do know, I mean, Bitcoin Magazine as a company, I think was established in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And funnily enough, Vitalik from the creator of Ethereum, I think was actually one of the original founders of Bitcoin Magazine, which I'm not sure if many people know about that or not, but at some point, I think he kind of got out of it, and then our current CEO, David Bailey, I think, might have purchased the rights for Bitcoin Magazine. But yeah, I haven't had as much to do really with the content that goes into it, but there was a really amazing team there that kind of was responsible for all of the articles and the content that went into it. And then obviously we had a lot of kind of guest contributors that wrote articles for us as well.
yeah, no, I think it's important to be able to bring bring the ideas together, and I think situate Bitcoin in this spectrum of freedom, technology,
Hmm.
kind of broader political changes that we're seeing.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of ancillary stuff that goes alongside it,
Yes.
and that's really powerful. And I think it's arguably one area in which Bitcoin is, because it is a decentralized project, it doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily have a leader, and so often the engagement with the legacy incumbent institutions, it's almost like there's nothing there to kind of counter the bullshit or FUD. There's sort
Yes. Yeah.
of, if you've got a company and an unregistered security, you can go and do a press release, but who writes the press releases for Bitcoin? There's no one, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, do you think Bitcoin Magazine overall has been able to help at least educate some people or provide insight into the bigger ideas?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the physical magazine has a lot of great content in there, and it's not just obviously Bitcoin related. Some of the recent themes, I mean, we had one of the magazines was kind of on El Salvador, and then we also had one focused on um, censorship. So I think it was called the censorship resistance issue. You might have that one. Um, so yeah, and then to your point, which you mentioned earlier around Julian Assange and the gatekeepers. So it is kind of not just Bitcoin content, but I think a lot of the kind of like tangential topics that kind of Bitcoiners find themselves involved in. And then I guess also outside of just the magazine itself, we do have a lot of great content on bitcoinmagazine.com as well, where we also have guest contributors. So yeah, I do think that plays a huge part in kind of helping to educate, and also for varying different levels of people in the
Yeah.
Bitcoin rabbit hole journey.
Yeah, you did mention something to me on Twitter earlier around the orange jumpsuit. What is that?
Yeah, so that was kind of my my first day actually with Bitcoin Magazine. I was in the Crown Plaza in Christchurch, not by my own choice. It was during the lockdowns, and we were kind of my wife and I, one of the last groups to kind of go through the MIQ system. But yeah, I mean that whole process of just trying to get into New Zealand during lockdowns was just insanely tedious and painful. It probably took us about 6 months of trying before we were able to get a spot. But once we finally did, I knew I was going to be locked in here for at least 10 days. I mean, some people were longer, but I figured I'd try and have a laugh with it. So I bought an orange jumpsuit off Amazon, and before that, the first day they let us outside, which is actually 3 days after getting there, and that's a whole other rabbit hole that I can go down. But yeah, the idea was really just to kind of try and lighten up the mood for which was for what was kind of a very dull and yeah, tedious experience, I guess you would say.
So that was coming back to New Zealand visiting, or you were coming back to relocate?
Yeah. No, we were actually meant to come back for our New Zealand wedding, but we had to call that off just because, I mean, my wife being from the US, none of her family would have been able to get back over. So we already had the kind of flights booked. So we decided, and we hadn't been back for a while, so we decided to come over anyway. But yeah, it was certainly challenging to get a spot to come over in the first place.
Yeah, and you grew up in Auckland though. So
I did, yeah.
Christchurch, that was the facility you got allocated for your time?
Yeah, but yeah, basically, I mean, we didn't know where we were going to end up. We flew into Auckland from LA and then kind of had like an hour or two long layover there. And then they told us, hey, you're going now to Christchurch. So that was another flight down there. And then, I mean, the whole experience is kind of crazy because you landed in Christchurch and then you've got a guy from the army coming onto the plane and explaining what was going to happen next. Long story short, we then had about an hour-long bus ride to actually get to the Crown Plaza, and then yeah, I mean the whole process was like something out of a movie. It was bizarre.
Or perhaps something out of Bitcoin Magazine, looking at Julian Assange, the gatekeepers, all of the issues we've had. I mean, has that changed your relationship with New Zealand? Some of that stuff you experienced?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it has. It's kind of I guess tarnished in a way the way I look at especially I guess the government in New Zealand and I guess how much authority and power they really do have. I just watched the Freedom Convoy documentary, I think it's called. We Came Here for Freedom on Rumble, and I mean I had no idea at the time. I mean when I was in New Zealand that the extent of those protests and kind of just watching that and seeing some of the way that the government didn't really respond at all to this peaceful protest and then coming in at the end with the kind of heavy hand of the law and the police. I mean, it got obviously quite dark there towards the end. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully it's a moment in our history that we don't have to kind of go back to. But, yeah, it definitely has kind of like just kind of tarnished my view of the government and, you know, what it's capable of, I guess.
So we came here for freedom. So that's about the New Zealand protests?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it has a lot of, if you haven't seen it, it's a great two-part documentary, but I think it kind of has a lot of parallels to the kind of what happened in Canada with the trucker movement, which is also kind of covered in the Bitcoin Magazine issue as well.
Yeah. No, it's certainly, I think, for a lot of people been a wake-up call and perhaps an introduction to Bitcoin and the adjacent ideas. This idea of freedom, of human rights, of self-sovereignty. In a way, it has stirred up discussion, and I think now that we're through that, a lot of people who maybe at the time had been swept up into it are able to look back on it and actually be like, man, what happened? Because we are paying for it now, as you know. You know, you want to buy a couple of liters of milk. and it's like $6 or something. So
Yep.
it's really like, well, they have done this thing, and now everyone's paying for it. And in a way, it's all related to Bitcoin. Bitcoin fixes this, as they say, but there is nuance to it, obviously.
Yeah, and I mean, even looking at what happened with Canada and the trucker movement there, I mean, I know a lot of them had their kind of bank accounts frozen, and then there was kind of a few prominent Bitcoiners, I think Ben or BTC Sessions, and I forget who else, but kind of helped out and was kind of, I think at one point they were circulating envelopes with a whole lot of sats on an address to try and help out these truckers that had obviously kind of had their livelihood taken away from them from what is arguably unnecessary mandates. So yeah, I mean, a lot of parallels between what happened there and New Zealand, and highly encourage anybody that hasn't seen that documentary to go check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's important, my reflection on it over these last few years, things have really, we've still got lingering reminders of it. Every now and then I see a QR code that's just been left to get dust in a shop or something. And I remember the apartheid, and I remember, not being able to go into places, and just the level of anxiety and fear which permeated everything. But being forgiving about that as well. It's like I appreciate that there were incentives that enable, government is just people. And ultimately, I think this is where the Bitcoin story comes in, where it's kind of like a systematic change. People will do whatever they're able to do to the extent that the incentives are there and they're able to actually do it. But if you remove their ability, for example, to print money or whatnot, it kind of changes the dynamic. It's like, well, it's just not an option anymore. And so it limits the behavior that we can be subject to by the government.
Yeah. And I mean, something you touched on there, I mean, the just the QR codes everywhere. And I think even I remember, like, at the time having to scan your QR code everywhere you go. And I'm not sure to what extent that was kind of tracked, but it does kind of open up the door for kind of a slippery slope into, almost establishing like two classes of people. It's you have the vaccine or you don't. And just some of I guess, the restrictions they put in place. I mean, my brother at the time, still wasn't vaccinated, but I just remember trying to go to a restaurant with him and having to share my QR code with him, so he was able to come in a minute later behind me and pretend to be me. But I mean, yeah, it was sad to watch, really, just the divisiveness, and also, yeah, to your point, the level of kind of paranoia. I mean, right after when I had left New Zealand, so it was when was it? End of March, I think, going into April, and I came over to Miami for the Bitcoin conference, so Bitcoin 2022, which was a lot of fun. But it was just crazy the night and day difference, going from mask wearing, very difficult to kind of move around the place in New Zealand, to all of a sudden you're at this like 25,000 person conference, and there's not a mask in sight, and everybody's happy as Larry, so to speak. Yeah, that was quite wild, just to see like how different two different countries or two different places can be at the same time, and their kind of response to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that Bitcoin Miami 2022, was that your first Miami conference?
Yeah, it was. So I'd only been working with Bitcoin Magazine for about 3 months at the time, so all remote from New Zealand, and then kind of flew over to Miami. Didn't get a lot of sleep, but it was an amazing time, and it was the first time I'd met anybody from the company. But just seeing the scale of that and kind of what goes into it is kind of really mind blowing. Like I said, I think there's 30,000 people there for 2 or 3 days, and yeah, a lot of fun, but a lot of kind of hard work that goes into that.
Yeah, so that was, I assume, in a Bitcoin magazine capacity. Were you was there a place for the magazine there, or were you sort of floating around talking to people? Like, what sort of work were you doing?
Yeah. So Bitcoin Magazine and Bitcoin Conference are kind of same two companies under Bitcoin Inc. But so I was I kind of had a floating role where I was helping with some of the merchandise, setting up the store there, and then kind of also working on my laptop in the back end. But just that first year, I think we were still kind of learning how to build a conference. There'd been previous ones in 2021 and 2019, I think, but we hadn't done something on that scale before. So there was just kind of a lot going on and really kind of all hands on deck. I mean, I remember a couple of the nights we were up to like 12 or 1 in the morning setting up chairs on the main stage. I think 2023 this year was we had our, I want to say our shit accounts. We had our stuff a lot more buttoned up. But yeah, I mean, it was a great experience both years. It was just a learning experience, and I think you kind of improve as you go.
What do you think is important to run a successful Bitcoin event?
It's a really good question. I mean, just a lot of planning. I mean, these things get just planned like years in advance. I think we're already, well, at the time we're already planning for Bitcoin 2025. So there's just a lot of work in the back end that goes into it that I don't think people necessarily see or might appreciate. But yeah, I guess a lot of hard work. There's obviously in terms of getting the right mix of speakers there, and that's always, I guess, kind of a tricky balancing act. I mean, I think this year there was some controversy with kind of the ordinals debate, and also kind of the timing of that around them coming on right after RFK had spoken. But yeah, I think you learn every year. You're never going to get it like exactly right and please everybody. But I think, yeah, just a lot of hard work and planning that goes into it. And yeah, trying to get the right mix of, I guess, content and the size of it as well. I think this year it was obviously the bear market made it a kind of a smaller event, but in some ways that was almost better. It was kind of a higher signal event, would kind of washed away some of the shitcoinery companies that may have been there in 2022, the likes of obviously like Celsius, for example. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer, but I think yeah, just a lot of hard work and planning that goes into it.
Yeah, interesting. And so with the 23 conference, as you said, there was RFK spoke there. What other major highlights or sort of takeaways did you have, or that you might have seen with the most recent conference?
Yeah, I mean RFK, I think his speech, I was actually lucky enough to catch that, and that was amazing. I mean, not sure if everyone's seen it, but it's up there on YouTube. But I think just regardless of what people think of him or whether or not he has a shot of actually becoming the president, the fact that we kind of have a candidate. There was more than one actually. Presidential candidates at a Bitcoin conference speaking favorably about Bitcoin, I think is just, an amazingly bullish sign. Outside of that, the strike announcement, I think was relevant to me, especially them kind of expanding their offering, I think, to 65 different countries. So the ability to kind of send fiat over Lightning rails, I believe. I mean, that's huge, right? For me, being in the US and wanting to potentially send fiat back to New Zealand. I don't know. Typically, you'd probably use something like TransferWise, but they're obviously taking some kind of fee. But I think that offering from Strike, being able to send fiat probably for very little, and not just to New Zealand, but I mean, obviously, countries like Tonga or El Salvador or all these other countries that kind of rely on remittance from family members overseas. I think that's huge. Just offering people the ability to do that without some of these greedy corporations. I mean, Western Union, for example, just taking a massive cut. Yeah.
So Strike has come out and said New Zealand will be on their list, on their rollout plan.
Yeah, I believe so. I'm not sure if it's available right now, but I believe New Zealand was one of the countries on that list.
Yeah, because recently I know Revolut, which is a fiat neobank, has become available in New Zealand, and the only other real option was Wise or TransferWise, as you say.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Even in a Bitcoin context, I do rave about it because it's so much better than New Zealand banks. In terms of the user experience. So it's like peak fiat, the ultimate form of fiat, though flawed, it's still a lot better than your old BNZ or Westpac for sending money overseas.
Yeah.
But Strike would be cool. I mean, I think that's one of the big limitations with New Zealand is we don't have those rails to connect internationally very easily. I don't think most people don't even know how to do it. It's sort of not a relevant use case. However, having the ability to easily, seamlessly send money to family without, as you say, going through these Western Unions or these money wire services could be really helpful. Especially with our Pacific neighbours, Australia, other places, just being able to seamlessly create those networks would be really powerful. I'm curious with Strike. I don't know how much you know about that, but is there one of the other issues we have in New Zealand is also Bitcoin liquidity. Basically, there's some brokers here that buy US dollar Bitcoin liquidity and sell it into New Zealand. Mm-hmm. Would something like Strike affect that at all, or would it change the way that, say, New Zealanders can buy Bitcoin?
Yeah, good question. I'm not 100% sure on that, but just thinking about it, I do think they have kind of the ability to send, definitely to send fiat over the Lightning network. So if you wanted to send US dollars and it gets zapped over Lightning, and then I believe you can get New Zealand dollars on the other end, but then also the ability to obviously send Bitcoin over Lightning as well. But yeah, to your question, I'm not 100% sure on that. I really kind of need to dig more into their announcement.
Yeah, no worries. I just wonder whether that could, live alongside Wise and Revolut as a way to say send money, send fiat and get Bitcoin back over, maybe some international peer-to-peer Bitcoin services and things like that. That's cool. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the Bitcoin conferences. And I'm curious, even in a personal capacity, have you been able to attend any other events or Bitcoin-related spaces, even going to Bitcoin meetups and things like that in the US?
Yeah, a few of them where I live. I'm about an hour south of Denver, so that's kind of the hub, I guess, in Colorado in terms of where most of the Bitcoin meetups happen. I have been to a few of those. Unfortunately, it's on a school night or on a weeknight. It can become a little bit challenging just with the distance to drive there and back. But yeah, I've attended a few of those. They're a lot of fun. And then in terms of other conferences, I have not attended any other ones in the US, but I know there are kind of a lot of really high signal conferences. I think BitBlock Boom is one coming up here in August. I think that's in Austin, and then the Swan guys doing Pacific Bitcoin. I think that might be October or November. So yeah, I might try and get along to some of those. I think they also provide really great value. Haven't attended one yet, but could be on the roadmap, I think.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, in your sort of comparing your time in New Zealand, which unfortunately would have been probably the COVID era, but comparing that with sort of your experience in the US, though, I mean, how would you compare the sort of the Bitcoin scene, I guess you could say, or even what you're seeing now between the US and New Zealand, and what can we learn?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the US is a massive hub for Bitcoin, just the size of the country overall and the scale. So, I mean, there's like a really robust kind of Bitcoin meetup scene here. I think like most cities will have some kind of Bitcoin meetup event on a regular basis. Comparing that to New Zealand, I mean, I've been pretty impressed with kind of the meetup scene. It looks like it's growing quite rapidly there. Like Paul or BitKiwi, I think, with some of the ones that he's been running. I've been watching those from afar on Twitter and getting major FOMO, wishing that I could attend. But yeah, I think like what you could learn from the meetup scene over here, I'm not really sure. I mean, I think like from what I can see on Twitter, those are great. I mean, some of the initiatives there, like being able to scan QR codes for beer, I thought was really neat. The fact that he's now got the Bitcoin magazines there and all the books and everything else. I mean, it looks like a great event and well attended. So yeah, I've been pretty impressed to see that kind of growing over the last year or so.
Yeah, cool. No, I'm always curious, sort of what people's perspectives are. Ultimately we are these southern islands in the bottom of the Pacific, and it's sort of, if you're not aware that there is, I think, broader trends and changes happening globally, New Zealand is often quite slow to get things. And having spent some time overseas myself, I'm always sort of like, I know there's stuff happening, and we're sort of not really quite ready to jump on it, which is good in some instances, but can be also frustrating in other ways. You look at countries that are like, man, Bitcoin is pretty well used, and pretty common, and it's not just this speculative thing that a few people are into. It's actually pretty common amongst the population. We're not there yet in New Zealand, and arguably that's arguably because things haven't fully fallen over yet with the New Zealand dollar. But I don't know. I'm always interested in those perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, and hopefully it's something that just kind of takes time. I mean, obviously Bitcoin's not the easiest thing to like just get off the bat. It takes a lot of time to kind of learn and understand the mechanics behind it, and I guess like why it has value. But yeah, certainly excited to see that there is traction in the New Zealand scene, and hopefully that continues. I'm not sure who it was, but I saw on I think Geyser, the fundraising Bitcoin app, that somebody had gone around and given like 120 copies of the Bitcoin Standard to Parliament. It was fundraising for that, so not sure if you saw that or not. Yeah.
So I know Simon Collins, who's behind that project, which is underway at the moment to do that. We're obviously coming into an election later this year, so I sort of holding fire on that. But he's I think following Dennis Porter, I think who did the one in the US with Congress.
Correct.
Following that model to fundraise to get copies of the of Bitcoin books to basically Orange Pill the new parliament, the new government, whoever it may be, which I think is really powerful because there still is a lot of misconception and a lot of kind of old school FUD, stuff that you would have thought, 2 years ago, okay, that was a thing, but now people are still talking about energy use, and it's like, come on, guys, New Zealand's literally like hydro and renewable energy already.
Right.
We can mine Bitcoin, no worries. It's all powered by hydro and wind and solar. Like there's there's not, especially in the South Island. It's like, man, it's all hydro, and if you're not using that power, it's literally just being wasted. So you might as well mine.
Exactly.
And that comes back. That comes back to the liquidity thing. Like the reason we don't have any NZD Bitcoin is because there's no mining here. There's no Bitcoin to sell locally. So we have to import all of our liquidity from overseas.
That's really interesting. I mean, I hadn't even really thought about that, like buying Bitcoin in New Zealand and that actually even really being an issue. But I mean, the mining side of things is like, seems like a no-brainer with all the hydro. And I mean, if you look at kind of like the model of El Salvador and them like really leaning into it, and what they're doing, using, what's the word for it? Volcano energy, basically. I mean, I think there's like huge opportunity there for New Zealand to really like embrace Bitcoin and embrace Bitcoin mining. I mean, hopefully it just happens with time.
Yeah, well, I think the important thing is the hash rate, having local hash rate. Because, I mean, we don't have a liquidity crisis as such. I mean, there's always Bitcoin to buy, but the fact is it's not, it's not sitting there it's not on the market in New Zealand dollars ready to be soaked up. It comes in. It comes in from, it's brought with New Zealand dollars, and from the US or wherever, and then it's sold on the market here. But at scale, that gets problematic though, because we're basically buying it in, whereas it would be a lot more sustainable and effective if it was local Bitcoin that's mined, being sold locally, and then we're not dependent, say, on as much on that foreign exchange rate, and just all of the issues that entails. And there's only a few people who are really in a position at scale to broker those large deals. So we have a limited selection of exchanges and brokerages in New Zealand. which is a little bit problematic if if the government wanted to sort of choke some necks. So there's just a few of them that
Right.
that they can do. So yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in that space, but certainly I don't think
Mhm.
it's. I think it would be a very positive thing for New Zealand to have more hash rate here.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just thinking about driving through Huntley, and if that could be turned into a kind of a Bitcoin mining operation or something along those lines, it'd be kind of neat.
Yeah, well, the thing with Huntley, obviously it is coal, but
Mm,
in a lot of cases it's needed. As I believe they have turbines that are peaker plants that need to be ready to go,
mm,
and perhaps even spinning all the time. And so, if there was something to soak up that energy until it was needed by the grid, yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but there's certainly ways to make that work, and I know there are smart people out there working on this. And
yeah.
I've been lucky to have a chance to talk to a few of them at least. But I think there is some real opportunity for New Zealand's unique energy grid, because what people don't realise as well is, I mean, we're island. We don't have other countries that we can plug into.
Right.
The US, Europe, any continental place can basically bring in power very easily,
Hmm.
but we can't do that here, so we have to kind of do everything ourselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, and look, including having hash rate in the supply chain somewhere. So
Hmm.
cool, man. So that's talking a little bit about that. The New Zealand scene here, and I agree. I think it's been really powerful having the meetups, really high signal events,
Hmm.
really good community here as well. Small but vibrant,
Yeah.
and it's very much I think, from my perspective here, certainly a lot of hope. That sort of things are a little bit negative now. I don't know when you were last back, but we got ram raids, we got cost of living, we got shootings, we've got everything bad happening
Yeah.
in the mainstream
Yeah.
media. But then the little golden nugget of Bitcoin, it's like, yeah, there's a little bit of hope there.
Yeah. Like Michael Saylor says, Bitcoin is hope.
Yeah. So yeah, that's really powerful stuff. And then yeah, you're in the US at the moment, but you've done a bit of travel recently, or you've
Yeah. Yeah. So in the US at the moment, we actually did go back to New Zealand. So we were back in January of this year. So for our actual wedding that
oh
didn't
yeah,
happen because of
nice.
COVID. So yeah, so that was the last time I was back in NZ. And then kind of after that went over to Japan and kind of did a 3 week kind of honeymoon around there. And I mean that was amazing. I know you've talked about that on a previous podcast that you lived over there, and yeah, I mean for me that was it was a place that was high up on my bucket list, and wife actually wanted to go to Europe, but I managed to, to twist her arm to go to Japan instead. But yeah, great experience, and would love to go back.
Um, I don't know if you've seen the video that came out about the world coin thing, and everyone's
The
lining
lines, yeah.
that line of people, because that was Tokyo. That line of people on that
Oh
video.
wow, I didn't realize.
Yeah, like
Okay,
it's got like the Tokyo Sky Tree building in the background, and
okay, yeah.
my only comment to that, I love Japan. I met a bunch of did you meet any Bitcoiners when you were there, or was it more
I
of a you're
didn't.
focused on the honeymoon?
Yeah, I did look up one place, it was a kind of like a Bitcoin hacker bar in Tokyo that I wanted to go to, but didn't manage to fit it into the schedule. But
No, that's all good. I mean, I went back a couple of months ago and met with some
mm,
of the Bitcoiners there, but it's definitely a very different vibe. Very deep underground. Everyone's a nim,
hmm
like because yeah, not to sort of shatter illusions, but I mean Japan's a very fun, cool place as well. But it's like there is some deep stuff going on, and just the fiat world there. Everything is fiat. It's kind of peak fiat, and
yeah,
yeah, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but like seeing the people line up for the world coin like that. That's the kind of stuff that is really hard, because it's like the paradigm of like what is freedom, what is self sovereignty. It's like it doesn't even exist in a way, and it
yeah,
requires education, and it's quite a lot of effort. And I don't know. I just see that and I think, oh man, there's work to do.
yeah. I mean that the whole world coin thing is it's I don't know, it's sad and also scary to kind of watch that unfold. And I mean, you being like a big fan of like obviously ChatGPT and what OpenAI have done there. I mean, I think that's a really fantastic tool. But then, yeah, seeing the other side of the coin, if you will, with what they're doing with OneCoin, it is almost dystopian. I mean, I've also seen kind of videos from crypto graffiti on Twitter going around, and I'm trying to tag up some of the OneCoin banners and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, to your point, there's just a lot of education to be done, and really like teaching people about the value of Bitcoin and why it's important, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where I think, again, the imagery, and this is sort of where my creative bent comes in, I guess, but the imagery of it, like that video that we're talking about with WorldCoin, and there's this line of people late at night somewhere in Tokyo, and like the very last frame, it's like some woman leaning down, like someone's holding her hair back, and she's gazing into the orb, getting her eyeballs scanned, and I'm like, then that, along with Apple Vision Pro and these like headsets over your eyes, it's like very sacrilegious in a way. Like I don't know, it's like the head and the eyes are the window to the soul, and the head is the kind of this holy place. You know, it's why many religions have like different headwear that they have, and to like to replace that with this like surveillance capitalist regalia. I don't know. There's something very just aesthetically wrong about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I mean, it's kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier with the QR codes and kind of scanning that everywhere you go, you can kind of see some like almost scary parallels with this thing that they've rolled out. I mean, yeah, it is a little bit disturbing to see and to see those lines and people just openly kind of embracing it without maybe necessarily giving much thought to actually what they're participating in.
Yeah. So that's been something that's been on my mind lately. And again, this comes back to your work, your previous work with the Bitcoin magazine, and that is that there is a technological element to this. Obviously, you know, Bitcoin, you know, BIPs and protocols and wallets and all of this stuff that needs to be built in the infrastructure. But then there's also, I think, an ideological kind of the spoken word about it, because this thing isn't guaranteed, you know, like you got people willingly lining up to get the WorldCoin eyeball scan. And I was having a chat actually last night. We've got a Wellington group that we kind of catch up with regularly, kind of like a bunch of Bitcoiners, and we're just saying, like, well, what would it take for a bunch of people to line up for some Bitcoin stuff? You know, because I don't see it happen. You know, that doesn't happen in New Zealand. Like, we don't have people lining up to come, you know, come and, you know, do I don't know, a Bitcoin meetup or something. I mean, there's people come to it, but it's not like going around the block, you know. And it's like that's really challenging, you know, because ultimately humans are not logical engineering creatures for the most part. You know, they're feelings based, and they're very susceptible to being swayed by sophistry and propaganda. And we saw that with COVID. You know, there's no way in which any of the stuff during COVID was actually necessary or helpful, yet everyone lined up and did it, you know? So the role of the written word, the role of something like a Bitcoin magazine or other, I would call it sort of the softer side of it, where it's the words, the podcasts, the documentaries, the outreach. I see a role for that, and not everyone sees what I see, but I think it is important. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, really just the kind of the more content and education, and I guess like different channels or ways of people being able to kind of touch Bitcoin or interact with it, I think is kind of hugely important. And yeah, to your point with COVID and people just kind of like, it's almost kind of like herd or sheep mentality, I guess. Just kind of like following the crowd and kind of being not wanting to be seen to be going against the community almost, and then always being tarnished for having a differing view. You know, I think it can be kind of a dangerous slope to kind of to go down. But yeah, I mean, really just, I think all we can really do is just try and, you know, like what you're doing with the podcast, create content, go to meetups, try and educate friends and family about Bitcoin and the values of it, and I guess why it's important.
How have you found it in the US? Just curious. I'm curious when talking to, say, friends or people who are not necessarily into Bitcoin, friends and family, like, how do they receive it, in terms of trying to orange pill someone?
Yeah, it can be a mixed bag. I mean, my in-laws, for example, I mean, it's kind of been a long journey with them getting them orange pilled, and they were kind of skeptical about it at first, but they've kind of come around as, I've had a lot of time to try and just help educate and orange pill them. But even some of their friends, they're in their, I think, 70s. One of the guys, and he's actually really interested in it, intrigued by Bitcoin. It's kind of, I take my magazines around there and drop them off, and he reads them, and so yeah, he's really kind of leaned into it. But I think it really depends. And I mean, obviously, with all the shitcoin casinos blowing up over here with FTX, and Sam, who I'm not sure how he isn't in jail right now, but that's obviously made it also a little bit harder. And I think there's probably just a lot of kind of confusion when people kind of see that happening and then somehow associate that back with Bitcoin, and not really, just not understanding the difference between crypto and Bitcoin, and that they're very different things. And that, yeah, I think again, it really just comes back to like trying to educate people and trying to like meet them where they're at, and what Bitcoin can help solve for them.
Yeah, what you just said as well, meeting people where they're at, has certainly been a revelation for me. Something I've kind of touched a couple of times, and kind of, I guess I swing between, in my role as podcaster, communicator, trying to, I swing between these roles of, fully to one side where I'm like, well, it's a lost cause. There's no way mainstream media or government or any kind of institution can ever get it. They're only going to get it once they're forced to get it, in the sense that the market speaks and their paper money is worthless. And then the other part of me says, well, actually, I kind of like New Zealand. I think we can recover and rehabilitate what was a temporary aberration of history, where we had a majority government that kind of messed things up. And we can kind of just have like New Zealand, but better, and not have to change too much around the underlying social fabric. And to do the latter and to achieve that outcome, I actually think there is a bit of engagement required with the existing legacy system, and kind of a bit of a transition. And I think I'm still not fully sure how those two kind of match together. I think a lot of stuff coming out of the US is very heavily set towards one. I guess a lot of the Bitcoin maximalist stuff is very much on one side, which is just burn it to the ground, where I'm kind of like, well, New Zealand is actually not that bad. If you go overseas and you come here, it's like, it's not that bad. There's a reason people move here. It's not for the money. It's some of the lowest wages in the OECD, but they come here for the lifestyle. And it's like, well, if we could just fix the money, then, I don't know. I mean, that's just me sort of throwing it out there, but I think, meeting these institutions, these people where they're at, as you say, and having conversations and trying to bring them over and see how far you can get.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, yeah, to your point, in the US, there is that kind of Bitcoin maxi camp that, a certain percentage of them, I guess, anyway, that are kind of just want to see it all burn to the ground. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure you necessarily want that, or want the USD imploding in a big heap of smoke. I mean, that's may not be the best path forward. And I think, yeah, to your point, in New Zealand, like trying to educate people as much as possible. I think, yeah, it's really just going to take time, but I'm hopeful. I mean, yeah, again, seeing the kind of like meetup scene that's happening down there. I mean, obviously more people are getting interested in it and have a lot of questions, and are coming to those meetups. So just the more that the community can do that and kind of have a grassroots movement, I think is definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think longer term, something, Big Kiwi Paul often says, maybe ideally it's just like the internet, it's just a thing that happens, and slowly but surely, maybe RFK, just a nice steady hands that ushers in Bitcoin. There's no real issues. It just kind of happens, and people kind of just move on. And it's like, yeah, we're on Bitcoin standard. It doesn't have to be. I think the fiat revolution is the one that's actually more more dangerous, which is that we let this thing keep going, cost of living gets out of control, and those people at the edges of society, the ones who are already, pushed to crime and to some of these negative activities, I often think of it as this rotting floor of society starts to crumble. Right. And that's your ram raids and your violent crime, and just the stuff on the edges starts to become more and more common. That's not the New Zealand that I grew up in. That's not what I want. This country isn't about that. We're not South Africa. We're not going to build gated communities. I want to leave my back door unlocked and go and play on the beach. Like that. That's New Zealand. And to get back to that world, if we can just fix the money, I feel like it could be a pretty peaceful revolution. It will be the other way, though, where if we don't fix the money, things start getting worse. The haves and the have-nots increase. That gap between people increases, and I don't know. I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, and I think we are still. Obviously, Bitcoin hasn't been around that long, and I feel like sometimes being in the Bitcoin community, you almost forget just how early it still is. But yeah, to your point again, with the likes of RFK coming on board, and it's now becoming more of kind of a mainstream issue over here, and hopefully that really continues. And you're seeing it a lot more here on mainstream media. It's getting a lot more coverage, and I think kind of the narrative is shifting from it. I guess being something that's going to boil the oceans and use all the world's energy by 2021 or whatever it was to this thing actually has some staying power, and it's in the political domain now. It's getting a lot more traction. So, hopefully with that, it kind of some of that spills over into other countries like New Zealand, and it makes local politicians there kind of take notice. I guess if you've got several presidential candidates over here talking about it and kind of campaigning on it.
Yeah, well, hopefully, we can orange pill a few of them at least. But hey, Andrew, what are your plans? I do understand you've moved on from Bitcoin Magazine. What are your plans next? Are you going to come back to New Zealand anytime soon and catch up? Like, what's next for you?
Yeah, so work-wise, I want to definitely stay in the Bitcoin space. Having come from fiat normie land, and kind of working a job where there was some kind of I don't want to say it was all negative, but having shifted from that into working in Bitcoin was just really night and day. So definitely want to try and stay in the Bitcoin space. Probably stay here in the US for the time being. Kind of waiting to see if I can get citizenship here, and then kind of then after that we may come back and look to set up shop in New Zealand at some point in the future.
Yeah, cool. And then any other travel or anything planned at the moment?
Not at the moment. Would love to do kind of some around Europe, but remains to be seen. We've just bought a place here, and then also have land down in the South Island in Hawaii. So, long term, would love to move back and set up down there, but no kind of immediate plans for travel.
Oh, so did you say you got land down in the South Island?
Yeah, down in Lake Hawaii, so just outside of Wanaka. Have some friends down there as well, but that's just an amazing spot, a great part of the country. Still relatively quiet for the time being. I know there's talk of that airport going in just outside of Taurus, which would obviously kind of grow that community a lot quicker. But it's just an amazing part of the country, and excited to set up shop down there at some point in the future.
Yeah. Do you think have you got any New Zealand visits even just planned for the next little while, or?
No, my parents, they run a business in New Zealand, so they're almost, I think, at the point of retirement. So once they do that, they're going to come over here and maybe do a ski trip, which would be fun. But maybe Christmas next year. It's obviously relatively expensive to fly back and back to New Zealand every year, but maybe Christmas next year I think is when we'll be back next.
No, absolutely. Sorry, I'll just it would be good to catch up at some point when you are here, or if I'm over that way. It'd just be good to keep in touch. But hey, man, I appreciate your time, sharing your story, and I wish you the best finding what's next for you in the Bitcoin space. I think there is certainly a lot of opportunities and it's good to see Kiwis out there just making stuff happen, man. I think it's exciting to see people like yourself, helping build this and just out there on the world stage.
Yeah, and likewise, I mean, what you're doing with this podcast, I think is great, and I mean, it's just spreading the message in New Zealand. So I think we definitely need more voices like yourself in the space. So keep up the great work.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Andrew. Much appreciated. And yeah, let's keep in touch.
Likewise. Thanks, Cody.
Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Cody Ellingham, and that was The Transformation of Value. If you would like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.